Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia, and I'm with Chariot Solutions. I'm here to introduce our speaker, Nithya Ruff, and she is presenting how to break down silos in your organization and enable open collaboration. All right, take it away.
Thanks, Alicia. So it's wonderful to be here, and I hope you've had a great conference so far. It's my first time at the Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise Conference, and I'm super excited to be here. I've heard nothing but good things about the conference. So my topic today is, how do you make sure that you don't have silos in your organization? And how do you make sure that everybody is collaborating, more together and more openly inside your organization? Let me introduce myself. I'm Nithya Ruff, and I work for Comcast. I lead our open source program office, and I also sit on the board of the Linux Foundation as the chairwoman. These are some of the areas that I am super passionate about. I work on behalf of tech women, advocate for tech women at Comcast and outside of Comcast as well. I'm on the advisory boards of a number of organizations, and I'm passionate about governance and making sure that women and underrepresented are everywhere on all levels of the organization. I build bridges all the time in my job inside the company or from the company to communities outside the company. And I'm a big believer that by working openly and transparently and across an organization and across globally, we can innovate faster, cheaper, better. So let me share with you where I work. I've told you a little bit about the fact that I work at Comcast. Comcast is really made up of a number of different entities. Comcast with the cable business, which is called the Xfinity organization, or the brand is Xfinity. And then NBC Universal, where we do a lot of our content, and then Sky in Europe and the rest of the world, and Comcast Business, which serves high-speed internet and other services to the enterprise, whether it's small, medium, or large. I wanted to start by talking about how development happens inside organizations today. And of course, it's a generalization, but it really captures how companies work inside the firewalls, if you will, to create products, create services, and get them out to customers. So it's often very top down. There's a vision at the senior leadership level of strategy, and that strategy then is driven to different business units, and then from the business units to product managers, and product managers to engineers in terms of what needs to be done. Clearly, they do collect customer feedback, they collect market information, but it often is driven from top down or a product manager. And teams tend to work, engineering teams and development teams often tend to work in silos with their own manager, their own budget, their own objectives. And very often teams don't work with other teams inside the company. And so they often don't leverage any expertise that may be there inside the company on different types of work. And they may even not know what skill sets are there across the company. In many cases, I've seen that the repositories for the code tend to be private. They tend to be proprietary code and often closed. They are not generally open for collaboration inside the company to others. And in at least pre-pandemic, a lot of us really depended upon co-location of teams and physically, being present in a room, doing brainstorming, very similar to this. And we believed in synchronous communications, meetings, a lot of stand-ups, etc. And of course, things have changed over the last year and a half, but typically internal teams depended upon, working very closely together. And they wanted to, teams also like to own their own work. Sometimes they don't trust other teams' work, so they don't want to, use something that was created somewhere else or allow other teams to touch their work. All this results really in a lot of duplication happening accidentally without planning, and very low reuse of work across an organization, and also very low discoverability. So people don't even know what other talents there are in the company, or what other libraries may be there, or frameworks or code that they could reuse. So this is the way work happens sometimes today. But the problem is, as you've seen both with the pandemic, but also with the last 5 years of very, very rapid digitization of the world, very rapid competition and need to go to market quickly, you cannot afford to operate in these distinct and separate silos without working together. You find that things are moving faster and faster and faster to market, especially over the last year and a half. You've had to speed innovation, you've had to speed features and functions to market, you've had to speed digitization to really survive and succeed in the marketplace. And what the last year and a half has shown us is remote teams are here to stay. Geographically dispersed teams are here to stay, and you need to learn how to work in a remote fashion and in an asynchronous fashion. And the cost of development is not going to go up any, meaning the budgets for development are not going to go up. So we need to keep making sure that we do more with the teams that we have, that we can be very productive. And we need to elevate our software development practices. One thing for sure, as a software developer, you're constantly learning, you're perpetually learning and improving your practices so you can be more efficient and more effective. And organizations have to leverage all of the assets that they have and the areas of expertise they have, and get people to productivity, time to productivity faster than ever before. And they have to know how to work with open source communities and other forms of innovations, and not just depend upon innovation happening inside their organization. So this is the compelling situation that many organizations are facing today. And as I kind of hinted at, developers are also, of course, facing a lot of challenges. The environments keep changing, tools change, languages change, so you're constantly learning. You sometimes find it hard to focus because you're constantly pulled away or pivoting between different things. Clearly, all of us have to work faster, we have to release more often, and which means you have to really leverage existing frameworks and systems and not just reinvent everything every time we need something. And onboarding, we discussed that, and it comes with onboarding can be done faster if we do a good job of documenting our decisions, documenting our communications, even in the code or outside of the code. And frankly, developers have so many choices in where they work today, and they want a frictionless environment, and they want practices that are frictionless. They want an attractive development environment. So given all of these challenges, I think there's an opportunity to learn from open source. Open source has succeeded over the last 30 years in establishing itself as a very fast and global and collaborative innovation engine. So let's look a little bit at the history of open source. This is the 30th year, by the way, of Linux turning 30, or 30 years since Linus put the code out there and said, hey, does anyone want to use this or collaborate with me? So let's start with, GPL was a huge disruptor in how we did copyrights, how we did patenting, how we licensed software. And frankly, it really created a viral nature to open source. And to me, it sped the adoption of open source dramatically. And then, of course, when Linux came out, it was able to use the GPL license to start getting people to use the code, collaborate, give back, and Linux kept growing bigger and bigger and more pervasive and more in everything that we use today, including the Mars mission. And then we come down to the establishment of foundations like the Open Source Initiative and the Linux Foundation, which then made it safe for everyone, including companies, to start using open source. And they started working on education, on marketing, on protecting the legal aspects of open source, and which then allowed organizations like Red Hat, businesses founded on open source, to flourish. And then you come to the last box, which is open source, frankly, is everywhere. And it is the engine for innovation for not just tech vendors and cloud vendors, but enterprises like Comcast, government, verticals like energy, healthcare. Everywhere you have a common set of problems to solve, open source has come in and helped solve these. So what are the characteristics that make open source so compelling and being able to help innovation to move so fast and so effectively? If you look at the elements that make open source so successful rather, I think there are two major elements. The first is how the source code and how software is shared in open source, and that's because of the license. The licenses make the software available to everyone, regardless of use. You can modify it, you can share it, you can distribute it, and that really is, if you will, the energy behind the reason the momentum happens in open source being shared and used in lots of different applications and use cases. The second very big factor is how source code and how software is created in open source. And that I call collaborative development model. So it is when people come together and work on a common problem, common issue, and they are compelled to create the software together, even though they're not part of the same organization. They may not physically be located in the same area, and may not even, work for us for the same company. So it is extremely important to understand what's this magic of collaborative development that results in people coming together and creating software faster than any other model can create. Collaborative development is also called inner source when it's practiced inside a company to create their own software. And this word inner source was coined by Tim O'Reilly from the O'Reilly organization, and also by a woman called Denise Cooper, who has established an organization called Inner Source Commons. You can Google that and you can find a lot of interesting information on how to practice collaborative development inside the company. So I wanted to deconstruct what collaborative development meant and why it is so magical. Some of the elements that make collaborative development work is, first of all, motivation. The desire to work together, the desire to solve a problem that is seen by this group of people or by a single developer who has a problem to solve. And then the way they set up, how they work together and how they make decisions, what the culture of that group is going to be, and then the common tools and infrastructure that they intend to use so that it becomes frictionless to work across this team. And communications, especially transparent communications, is a very important element of collaborative development, without which there's no trust, there's no common mission, vision, motivation for the team to work together. And then architecture plays a really important role in how people work collaboratively. So by architecting a product or a project in a very interesting way, you can actually encourage people to work better together. So we'll examine some of these factors and see how one can go about setting up these factors inside a company so that we have collaborative development or inner source inside a company and break down those silos. But before we go to breaking down the silos and putting all these elements in place, you find that you need some air cover and you need some big issues to be solved in order to create collaboration inside a company. The first one is an obvious one. You need your senior leadership to sponsor this kind of effort and and have the vision really to say, we want an open and collaborative organization. You cannot make culture change of this magnitude or this kind happen if senior leadership does not support it. The reason being, often financial structures and incentives and the way an organization is set up is all set up to really work separately and work often in competition with each other. So if you don't have senior leadership support to change the way budgets are done, change the way incentives are done, change the way chargebacks and funding for these common projects are done, things don't happen. People just go back to their old way of working. So you really need to also set up some cultural constructs, such as rewarding people for doing work not just inside the team, but also for contributing to other teams, and creating more cross-group trust and encouraging teams to look outside to use components that are already in the company and not just to always create before they even know where components are. And a big element of being able to use other components is making it easy to discover, right? One of the things we talked about in a proprietary model or in the way development happens today is that very often you don't even know where you can go to leverage certain work that's already done. So you don't even know if others are working on the same problem. You don't know how much time it'll take to even leverage what they're doing or contribute to what they're doing, and how to work with others inside the company. So some of these organizational changes first need to be made before you can go ahead and start collaborating inside a company. And really, there are lots and lots of benefits of working collaboratively. So the first column I want to say is, even if you don't open up your project for others to contribute to or for others to consume, and you just start with the architectural elements of collaborative development, you've already improved your development practices and you've already improved how you onboard your developers. So by making your project more modular, more distributed, more documented, having quality code because now it's open to others to see, you are starting good practices inside the company. So my point is, you don't even have to go all the way to collaboration in order to get the benefits of collaborative practice. You can just architect your project to be like an open source project and start getting the benefits of good development practices. But if you want to go further, you can then set it up for collaboration, and you can actually communicate to the rest of the organization that you're open for pull requests from other groups. You're open for others to consume your code, to contribute to the code, to contribute their time. And with this, you start seeing even more benefits, such as reuse of code across the organization. You'll start seeing that you have more support for your code. You're not just a small team supporting your project. You have other people starting to file issues, file bug reports, contribute documentation, perhaps even contribute code to your product or project, and you're creating more common practices across the organization. People, by contributing to other teams, are learning something new. And just by setting up the practices like documentation, componentization of your architecture, etc., you start seeing that onboarding is becoming easier. Some of the senior members on your team can mentor people much faster. And you're starting to build trust in the organization. And clearly, you can go all the way to open source, where you're saying, not only do I want to have people collaborating on this project, but I think the whole world can benefit from this project. In which case, you go through the approval process in your organization and you actually make it open and contribute it to the good of open source. And the benefits here start even more increasing. You start building community and brand for your company. You have more people engaged from other companies, other use cases, and your project starts growing. You establish thought leadership, and you can even use this external project to recruit developers into your company because people start getting involved in your project. You see how they work, and you know that they're aware of this code or knowledgeable about this code, and you can start recruiting these developers and bringing them into the company. So whether you just do architecture of the code for more collaboration, or you actually open it up for internal collaboration or external collaboration, you start seeing benefits of this collaborative development process throughout with all three choices. So how do you implement collaborative development inside your organization? One of the first steps would be just asking yourself, what is the vision and what kinds of projects do we want to collaborate on? And for example, are there teams downstream from us that depend upon what we create? Are we a platform team and there are teams downstream who really need to know how to build their applications on our platforms or need to understand how to work with us? This is one use case which is very ripe for setting up as an inner source project. The second could be, are we a common platform or a service or an element that many teams need in the organization, and they have slightly different use cases and slightly different ways to integrate with our platform. And so, instead of us having to fix all that or customize it for each team separately, let's empower those teams to contribute their use case or their changes to the platform, so that we now then have a library of different ways that people can work with this platform. It could be that you do not have a certain skill set to work on your project and you need that skill set and it's somewhere else in the company. So can you invite that person to start contributing to this project so that you can take that skill set and add it to what you need? Clearly, you may not need that person's full time, but you do want that person to be able to contribute to the project when needed. And then one of the classic use cases or vision could be when you start kind of doing an inventory of a certain framework or a certain library, you may discover that there are multiple versions of this component in the company, and they're all competing with each other. They're all taking resources, and it just doesn't make sense to have 10 different versions of something. So you start saying, I wonder if we can merge this, and I wonder if we can take all of the different ways this is being used and create kind of a common component. And frankly, one of the visions for collaborative development can just be, we just want to improve the way we work. We just want to improve how we develop code. So all of these things are things to think about as you start the journey to collaborative development, really looking for what are the kinds of projects we want to use to apply this collaborative development framework to. The next is the architecture. And I mentioned that architecture can be powerful in incenting people or telling people to come work with you because you're making it easy, you're making it frictionless for them to work with you. And some of the components of architecture can be, is your system monolithic, where it takes them years to learn what your system does? Or the code is so convoluted that it is difficult to even know where to begin or where to change or where to add or where to do anything. So wouldn't it be better if it's modular or with subsystems and more componentized so that you can then expose the subsystem that you want collaboration on and keep the ones that you don't want collaboration on separately. And it becomes easier for people to onboard to the project and start contributing to the project. Documentation, 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 right? It is so important, whether it's within the code as history for the commits or outside the code, so that people can find it easier to consume your code, even as users, and then to contribute time and contribute code. Clear APIs so people know how to work with you, and making it easy to onboard to this project, not just through architecture, but documentation, culture, how you welcome teams, which we'll discuss a little more in length. And then making your repo open with allowing permission for people to read the source and write access to issues and bugs, and giving them restricted access to source control so that you don't have everybody committing everything. You still need some governance of the project. And of course, making it discoverable. Some sort of a central portal, some sort of a Stack Overflow type of thing inside the company where people can say, I want to see if there's a library that does this. And you're able to then discover the code, who the people are, how to get engaged with that team, and make it easier to collaborate across the company. We talked about culture, and culture starts with a lot of governance types of questions that you need to answer when you're setting up your project for collaboration. You've got to say, are we encouraging and incentivizing teams inside the company to share, consume, and contribute to other projects? And that really goes back to the organization change that I mentioned. You need your senior leadership support to encourage, incentivize teams to share, to consume each other's code, and to contribute to each other's code. And then you have to really examine how we making it possible then for these teams to start working with us. We talked about documentation, we talked about how architecture is structured, we talked about, and we'll talk more about other ways that you can express to people you're welcome. You're welcome to come and contribute. You're welcome to work with us. You're welcome to, actually use what we do. And clearly, people who start getting involved in your project want to know, how are product decisions or feature decisions made? Where are they recorded? Is it transparent? Is there a gatekeeper who manages the direction of the code and the changes in the code? Are the roles and responsibilities clearly defined as to what the maintainer does, what my responsibility as a contributor is and a committer is? How do we achieve transparency on roadmap? How is this project, making sure that every decision they make is communicated in a clear and transparent fashion? It's really all about creating trust. And so these are some of the questions from a governance perspective you really need to ask when you're setting up your project, including a good code of conduct so that people who work in this project feel safe, feel like that they're heard and valued, and that if there is an issue, that there's a really good path to get support for the issue or resolution on the issue in a very objective and fair fashion. The next thing you need to set up in order to work collaboratively is really express how are we going to work together, how are we going to communicate, and tools and process often are the backbones of allowing people to work better together, whether it is having a common CI/CD workflow or common tests, good and well-documented developer environments make it easy for people to all kind of have a consistent way of working, that we'll use. I'm just giving an example. We'll use pull requests to submit contributions. And this is how pull requests will be validated and accepted. So everything is clear and well-known, and people are working consistently across the organization instead of kind of trying to figure out, how do I do this? Or how do I talk to someone? Coding styles are well documented, contribution guides are well documented, how to report a bug, how to report vulnerability, and how decisions are recorded, etc. And of course, tools like GitLab and GitHub make it easy to collaborate because they've set up around this model of collaborative development. Again, the intent is, how can we create trust? How can we create transparency? How can we create a welcoming, collaborative community? Because people will not join you and work with your project if these sets of tools and communication vehicles and documentation is not clear. No one has time for friction. No one has time for trying to struggle to discover what's happening. The easier you make it for people to get involved in your project, the more effective it is that you build a successful project. And the benefits are plenty. We've talked about a number of benefits when you move from, starting a project in an open fashion to doing inner source or collaboration inside the company and outside. And just summarizing some of them, when you use open source or when you use kind of common projects inside the company, it's really well understood and it becomes easier to recruit, onboard people, train people, have a sense of continuity in the team, and not feel like if you lose people, that it's going to be very difficult to find other people with the same skill sets or ability to work in that project. And in open source in particular, when you open source something, you have an entire global community that you can learn from. And when you use an open source component also, you know that you can go back to a lot of different people and you don't have to just depend upon a few people. And if they leave, what are you going to do? There's a great deal of fulfillment that people feel when they work collaboratively, and also with open source. And we found that people tend to stay with companies that have a good open source culture, that have a good collaborative culture. And it's easier to mentor because you have documentation both in the project, but also you have more transparent communications on how the project works and where the project is going. But at the end of the day, you just elevate software development and engineering practices across the organization just by using some of these methods, even though you may not open up your repo to others or you may not open source something. And I just wanted to kind of close with sharing how we do inner source or how we do collaborative development inside of Comcast. So Comcast started working in open source around 2006. Between 2000 and 2006, we started actually consuming open source inside the company because we were more and more a software development house. We were creating our products using open source and software. And so you can see from all the way till 2017, we not only consumed open source, but we created projects that we open sourced. We started contributing to other projects whenever we made any changes to those projects, whether it's cloud projects like Kubernetes or an embedded project like Yocto. We started contributing back to those projects. Then in about 2017, we started realizing that there were so many benefits to how open source worked, how fast it worked, that we needed to use some of those practices inside the company to really allow teams to reuse, collaborate, to work better together. And that's when we introduced some of the inner source practices inside the company. And some of the examples of inner source projects that I've seen are, there are projects, for example, that say, let me set it up as a community inside the company and learn about how to grow my community. And that then will help me when I actually open source the project, because I've already practiced how to build a community, how to componentize my architecture, how to document things. And it becomes easier for me then to build an open source community when we open source the project. The second has been, for example, there was one project which said, we are such a small team and we are bearing the burden of maintaining this project ourselves. And we have hundreds of users inside the company. Wouldn't it be nice if we can enable those users to not just file issues against the project, but actually start, contributing bug reports and bug fixes, and actually a module that would support what they want. So it really helps you reverse, or users don't have to wait for the development team to fix something before they can use it. And then we've also found some teams who were doing duplicate work. So there were a number of teams, I think one in particular I remember working on exactly the same thing in two different organizations and in two different communities. And they realized that perhaps by working better together or collapsing the project into one single project, they could really do common work and reduce duplication. Harmonizing multiple applications is another one, where a team is bringing together a number of different separate applications into one single application, so that this one application is able to do or support multiple use cases. And clearly self-service and reducing priority inversion. What that means to me is, instead of people waiting for this core team to fix things or to make the new feature available, why not enable your users to start contributing? It's very similar to sharing the burden of a commonly used module. It's just enabling your users to go from users to contributors of time, then contributors of code, and then maybe even becoming influential in the project, just like all of us do when we join an open source project. And the way we've organized inner source work, the open source program office, which is where I sit, we do developer relations inside the company, where we help our developers use open source more effectively. And then we also help with a lot of other open source questions, whether it is compliance, or how do I work with this different community out there, or how do I contribute back to open source? And then we also help teams who want to adopt this collaborative development practice move to a more inner source or a collaborative development type of framework. And we've been doing a lot of work to measure how teams are actually adopting this practice and how mature the inner source practice is inside the company. And one of the ways we do it is to see how many external contributions are coming into a project. say if there's a team A and they've opened up their project, we want to measure contributions or pull requests coming not just from the owners, which is team A, but how many of these pull requests are coming from team B, C, and D? Um, and are these meaningful contributions? Are they actually feature function contributions, or are they just, small contributions? That'll kind of demonstrate to us how broadly adopted this particular project is. And clearly, we want to also measure developer happiness and productivity. Is doing collaborative development actually helping developers do better work? Is the friction less because you have more people kind of contributing, or you have this sense of value that your product is or project is providing to the organization because more people are using it? And this is something that we're still working on, the right way to measure developer happiness and productivity. And clearly, the final outcome that one needs to measure is, by adopting this collaborative development practice, did it help me break down silos? Did it help me speed innovation? Did it help me scale the innovation faster across the organization? And that's something that we are also trying to create, better measures for. With that, I want to kind of end and take questions by saying, collaborative development inside a company is so powerful and so impactful to not only improving how your coding skills are, but keeping developers happy. And frankly, it's also the key to innovating faster. We know how open source is one of the fastest ways to innovate. And by adopting some of those principles, we can see faster innovation and breaking down of silos and more collaboration inside the organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation on collaborative development. Getting rid of silos is definitely one of the biggest challenge of effective software development. I'm going to move into questions. I'll read you some of the questions that are coming in Zoom chat. And anyone in the audience, feel free to ask questions and I'll read them out. The GitHub pull request in code review was created for a zero trust relationship. This allows anonymous users to contribute to an open source project. Why do internal teams adopt the same zero trust practice? What should a team do where trust should exist to replace the PR?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm afraid that there's still a challenge within an organization, cross organizations, to have that trust. People consistently will say, I don't want to accept a commit from someone else who may not know the kind of work that we do. So the pull request is really a good way of allowing for that kind of lack of trust to function together until we build that trust. But your question is a good one. So if there is trust, what should we do? I haven't really thought about what would replace a pull request. We tend to use GitHub very extensively, and so we like that practice. And so we haven't thought about a replacement for that. Peter, I would love to know if there are any suggestions you have to how to replace that.
I'm keeping an eye on chat. In the meantime, for Peter, you feel free to message suggestions in Slack or send it to chat, and we can brainstorm a bit here. For the next question, could you tell us more about any measures of happiness or productivity you've tried?
I think one big one that a lot of organizations do is something called an employee net promoter score. So this is a survey that at the company level, I know we do and other companies do, which say, Are you happy with the organization? Would you recommend this organization to others? Would you, are you proud of the work that you do? Those kinds of things. So you can, and we've been trying to kind of insert some questions into our company-wide survey to get a sense of, are people happy because of the kind of practices we have. The second is just surveys, asking teams, um, did this help you? Once a year, we do a census of, what kinds of engineering tools teams use. And one of the questions can be, are these practices helping you to be happier developers? Is it reducing the friction? Is it reducing some of the challenges of doing your work? And another one, frankly, is retention. When you see employees not leaving the organization or working longer, be more motivated, they all are indicators to me of developer happiness and productivity. Clearly, this is an area that needs a lot more measures, and I'm going to be taking a deeper dive into other ways of measuring this. There's a project called Chaos at the Linux Foundation, which does a lot of work on metrics in general, metrics around community health, metrics around diversity of projects, metrics around developer happiness. And I'm going to, spend some time working with that project to look at these measures.
Thank you. And some ideas from Peter, I'll phrase them as questions. Have you considered pair programming as a way to eliminate the code review step? And why is it important to have these trusts and checks? Because we have trust and we work together on a team, we should be able to eliminate queues and wait times and shorten lead time.
I think if you're within one single team, there's definitely trust, and there's no you don't need to kind of put them through the paces of all of these different checks and balances. But if you're working cross teams, say if you're in one business unit and you're working with another business unit, they may not be trust, Peter, and so that's where I'm suggesting that we implement some of the PRs. The pair programming is an excellent idea, I think, within the same team, if you're trying to get people to know what's the right way to work with this project and what's the right set of tests to use and how to commit code, etc. So that's a good measure.
This is one of my own questions. When we talk about collaborative development, we focus a lot on individual contributors and developers. But some of what you suggested talked about management and sponsorship from leadership. What does that look like? How can management and leadership enable this more?
So for example, a lot of managers today are incented to keep their teams working on things that the manager is responsible for and has, say, is measured for and is incented on delivering on their own projects. So very often managers do not allow their developers to make time to go work on another project or contribute to another project somewhere else, because they feel that that takes away from getting their own goals achieved. So we need to incent managers to allow teams a certain percentage of their time so that they can contribute to open source, they can contribute to other team members' projects. Perhaps it's because this team is using that component from that other team. And by contributing, you're making sure that your needs are also being factored into that project. And so it could be as close as that, or it could be, I'm doing this for the good of the company. And by helping that other team, I'm actually doing good for the company, not just my own team. So it's really changing the mindset of the manager to look beyond his or her own team and to help other teams for the good of the company, but also selfishly because you're using that component and you want to make sure it's going the right direction.
Thank
I
you.
think another question on how are developer departures handled with the gatekeeper, repo owner, or key PR approvers. And, you know, I don't know if Vince is referring to just, you know, contributors to the project. I couldn't give you a very clear answer on this, but what I was trying to say from a role responsibility and also from a, I guess, you know, from a continuity of the project perspective, it's important to keep track of all of these things. You know, who has commit privileges, who has contribution privileges, certainly who's the gatekeeper, and do we have a backup gatekeeper or maintainer should this person leave the company, and who is next in line. Many open source projects also struggle with this question of, you know, what do I do if the maintainer decides to step down or move away? And we constantly, at least for the projects that we run inside the company and also on open source on our GitHub externally, we always try to kind of keep track of who's the maintainer, is it being actively maintained, who's the backup. But with regards to developer departures, you'd have to disable, I guess, their emails from contributing or you know, not being involved in this project. I'm going to go back and ask the question, Vince, of my teams in terms of what happens. Yeah, Vince says if the key people leave the company. Yeah, you just have to have backups and then make sure that you've kind of removed them from all of your systems, right? From Microsoft or from your GitHub, and all the permissions have been changed and things like that.
I'll take this opportunity to ask one more. How does the architect role at a company change when the boundaries between projects become more flexible?
That's a great question. You have to be a lot more transparent about asking for feedback and asking for input from lots of different teams who are involved, all of the different organizations that are involved in that project, and record the decisions a lot more transparently through asynchronous means, whether it's Slack or through GitHub or through other means. You've got to kind of put on the hat of, I'm serving, you know, all of these different organizations. I'm not just serving my organization, and I can't just optimize the decisions I make for just, you know, the person I'm reporting to. I'm really working on behalf of, you know, all of these different developers who work in this project and different users of this project. So just like a maintainer in an external open source project, if he or she works for company X, but the project serves, you know, a large number of companies, they have to be very neutral. They have to make sure that there's a direction expressed for the project, and then they stick to that with rationale and logic and accept feedback from, you know, all of the different stakeholders. It's one of the big issues that people worry about, is if a project becomes hijacked by one company or one person, right? And so a good maintainer, frankly, the other thing a good maintainer can do is have a technical steering committee, which comprises of, you know, lots of different users and contributors, so that he or she gets the feedback from a broad set of people before making decisions.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, so we can wrap up here. There is a Slack channel called Room B if people would like to continue the conversation. So thank you very much for that talk. I really liked the topic. And I hope everyone enjoys more of the conference.
Thank you so much, Alicia.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you, everyone.